Welcome to Midnight Casebook, where every shadow hides a secret and every mystery begs to be solved. Tonight, we unravel the chilling tale of Murderer Sat in Plain Sight. Father Brown Mystery, a fan-made story paying homage to the brilliance of G.K. Chesterton's legendary detective. We'd love to have you along for this enigmatic journey. Drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from. Share your theories, and if you spot any inconsistencies, don't hesitate to call them out. Your keen eyes and sharp minds help us craft even more captivating mysteries in the future. Chapter 1. The Confession in the Rain. The rain had started sometime before midnight, slicking the cobblestones with a shine that made everything look like it was weeping. Gaslight halos shimmered in puddles, and the hiss of wet tires over tarmac played counterpoint to the steady drip from the chapel roof. Father Brown stood just inside the threshold of St. Augustine's, collar turned up, cassock damp, at the hem, watching the city dissolve into shadows and steam. He was small, round, and quietly inconspicuous, the sort of man cabbies forgot they'd picked up, and thugs didn't bother to rob, which was exactly why they underestimated him. She came in just after the bells tolled one, pushing the heavy church door open with a hand that trembled beneath a red leather glove. She was tall, dangerously composed, and smelled faintly of gin and gardenias. Her hat tilted like a secret. Her coat was cut close to the body and soaked through at the shoulders. She looked like sin, dressed in Chanel, and her voice, when it came, was the kind you didn't forget, the kind that could wrap itself around a lie and make you beg to believe it. "Are you the priest?" she asked, looking him over with disdain she didn't bother to hide. "I am," said Father Brown, eyes twinkling with a gentleness that disarmed and irritated in equal measure. "And you're wet." "I'm more than that," she said, stepping inside. "I'm damned, or close enough." She lit a cigarette with a gold case that gleamed even in the dim chapel light, then looked around at the stained glass as though judging its sincerity. "Do you hear confessions, Father? That's rather the job. Even when the penitent doesn't want forgiveness." Father Brown tilted his head. "Forgiveness is offered. Wanting it is your own matter." She didn't sit. She didn't kneel. She stood like she was used to looking down at men, and rarely found herself outmatched. "He's dead," she said finally, "and I think I helped him die." There it was, the thing that always came, sooner or later, usually late, usually drenched in silence or gin. A soul reaching its threshold, only to find Father Brown waiting like a quiet doorman. "Go on," he said. "I didn't pull the trigger," she said, "but I may as well have. I knew what was going to happen. I didn't stop it." Father Brown looked at her with that odd mixture of sympathy and precision that felt like being dissected by a saint. "And who was he?" "A man who knew too much," she said. "A man named Vance Harker." Father Brown's eyes flickered. That was a name whispered in courtrooms and back alleys, a man who'd made enemies in high places and friends in low ones. He'd been a whistle in a city full of fog, blowing the cover off rackets, city council schemes, police bribes. Now he was silent. The woman exhaled smoke through her nose. He was going to bring them down. All of them, but he didn't understand the kind of men he was playing with. "And you?" "I was the bait," she said. "And the noose." She gave a low laugh that ended in something like a sob. "I was supposed to get close, feed him crumbs, make him fall, but he didn't fall, not until someone else pushed him." Father Brown's voice was soft. You were working for them. I was, she said, until I wasn't. Outside, thunder cracked against the night, like knuckles on bone. The woman's cigarette burned out in the votive light, and for a long moment, neither spoke. You didn't come here to confess, Father Brown said. You came here to shift the weight. She looked at him sharply. Is that what you think? I think you want the guilt gone without giving up the truth, he said. You want absolution without surrender. But that's not how confessions work. She smiled then, a cold, cutting thing. You're not as soft as you look, are you, Father? No, said Father Brown simply. Softness is for pillows. Truth is harder. He gave her tea in a chipped mug from the rectory. She didn't drink it. I can't go to the police, she said. They'd just hand me back to the men who used me. Names, said Father Brown, would be a start. She hesitated, then whispered them like hexes. Flanagan, Kroll, Lieutenant Doyle. The city's underbelly wore uniforms and silk ties and sat in pews on Sundays with hands unclean. Doyle was the worst of them, a cop with a badge for cover and a blackjack for punctuation. He ran a gambling racket out of a jazz club called the Brass Lantern and used informants like bait on hooks. Harker had been closing in, and now Harker was gone. I saw Doyle the night Vance died, she said. He knew I'd been talking to him. He smiled like he already had the obituary written. Father Brown nodded. And yet you came to me. Because you don't have a gun, she said. And you don't want anything from me. No, Father Brown agreed, just the truth. And your soul, perhaps. She left just before dawn, disappearing into the wet shadows like a secret too ashamed to stay. Father Brown stood for a while in the nave, listening to the rain speak in tongues against the stone. He didn't call the police. He walked instead to the Brass Lantern. It was the kind of club where sins were poured neat and lies came with jazz accompaniment. Red velvet curtains hung limp from stained cornices. The bartender looked like he'd been built from regret and broken promises. Father Brown sat at the bar, ordered milk, and waited. Doyle arrived around 10, swaggering in like he owned the place, which, in a way, he did. His eyes landed on Father Brown and narrowed. You lost, Padre? Not at all, said Father Brown. I've come for confession. Doyle snorted. Wrong booth. Is it? Father Brown's eyes twinkled. You were with Harker the night he died. I was with a dame. Got 50 witnesses, could tell you the same. Witnesses are cheap, Father Brown said, but guilt is expensive. Doyle leaned in. You don't scare me. I wouldn't try, Father Brown said, but you might be scared by what's coming. Harker had a letter, a ledger. He left it with someone. Doyle stiffened. That twitch, it wasn't much, but Father Brown saw it. He gave it to you, didn't he? Doyle sneered. That's why you're here. No, Father Brown said, but someone saw who killed him. Someone who regrets it. Doyle's mouth twisted. Regret doesn't hold up in court. Perhaps not, said Father Brown, but it has a way of calling down justice anyway. Doyle stood suddenly. Two men near the piano moved as if by signal. Father Brown didn't flinch. Before you try to make me disappear, he said calmly, ask yourself, if I vanish tonight, who else knows the names? There was a long, pregnant silence. The music kept playing, and the bartender kept wiping glasses that never quite got clean. You think you're clever, Doyle growled. No, said Father Brown, I think I'm faithful. There's a difference. He stood, paid for his milk, and walked out. They didn't follow. The rain was gentler now. The streets smelled of smoke and regret. Back in the chapel, the woman was waiting. Her name, she told him now, was Evelyn. Her real name. The one she hadn't used since she'd learned how useful lies could be. "I saw you leave," she said. "You shouldn't have gone alone." "I wasn't," Father Brown said. "I never am." She looked at him then, as if seeing something behind the tired eyes and sagging coat. Something she didn't understand, but maybe believed. "What now?" "You tell the truth," he said, "to the papers, to the world, to yourself. They'll come for me." "They already have," he said gently. "But now you stop running." She nodded slowly, and for the first time, she looked like someone who wanted to be saved. The paper ran the story 2 days later. A ledger with names, Evelyn's statement, a quiet priest with no photo. The storm broke over the city like judgment. Doyle vanished before the warrants arrived. Flanagan hung himself in a hotel in Queens. Kroll made the news when his yacht exploded off the Jersey coast. Evelyn stayed. She worked in the parish kitchen. She scrubbed floors, poured soup, and stopped wearing red. She never wore gloves again. One night, weeks later, she asked Father Brown, "Do you think I'll ever be forgiven?" He looked at her with that same soft clarity. "I think," he said, "that the moment you stopped wanting to escape guilt and started living with it, that was the beginning of grace." She didn't reply, but she cried. And for once, it wasn't for herself. Outside, the rain fell again. Inside, the city's smallest priest lit a candle that flickered in defiance of the dark. Chapter 2. A glove on the altar steps. The fog crawled over the rooftops like a slow, dying animal, slick with soot and hiding the city's sins in its breath. In the half-light before dawn, the streets glistened from a night's worth of rain, and the gutters ran like veins. Down by the docks, a dog barked once, sharp and lonely. Somewhere farther off, jazz curled through a third-floor window like smoke trying to forget what it burned. And in the heart of St. Dymphna's, a small, aging priest stood in front of the altar and bent to pick up a single black glove. It was satin, women's, delicate, wet. Father Brown turned it over in his hand, his brows drawing together, not in alarm, but in the quiet thoughtfulness of someone watching the final piece fall into a puzzle they'd begun assembling weeks ago. He didn't call the police. He never did. Not first. Instead, he looked to the statue of Saint Michael above the altar, sword lifted in perpetual judgment, and gave the faintest nod. By the time the sacristan arrived, rattling the side door with keys and muttered apologies, Father Brown had already made a pot of tea and wrapped the glove in an old cloth like something sacred or toxic. It was both, in a way. The sacristan, a sharp-faced man named Otto, with nicotine-stained fingers, froze when he saw it on the table. "That wasn't there last night," he said too quickly. "No," Father Brown agreed mildly. "It was left some time after the last candle, burned out, and before the sky turned to ink." Otto swallowed. You think it means something?" Father Brown stirred his tea. "Everything means something, Otto. It's simply a matter of how much we're willing to see." Otto didn't reply. The old man had worked in churches too long not to recognize when something sacred had been disturbed. Still, he kept his eyes on the floor and pretended he didn't see the tremor in his own hands. The phone rang at 7:30. It was Lieutenant Harrigan, voice thick with sleep and suspicion. "You here yet?" "Hear what, Lieutenant?" "There's a girl missing." Lucille Gray, big-time singer at the Violet Room. Real torchy type, but clean. Mostly didn't come home last night. And we found her shoe 3 blocks from your chapel. Father Brown paused. Just the one? Just the one. Then I have the glove. There was a silence that lasted too long on the line. You think she's dead? I think someone wanted me to think so, Father Brown said, which is not quite the same thing. The Violet Room sat under a broken neon sign that blinked Viet Roem, like it was stuttering on a secret. Inside, the air was thick with last night's gin and too much rouge. A girl in a silver dress mopped the stage with an expression that belonged more to widows than to hostesses. Behind the bar, a tall woman with ice-colored hair and a smoke-rough voice lit a cigarette and watched Father Brown walk in like he was the wrong man for the right story. You a cop? She asked. No, he said. Something much more dangerous. She barked a laugh. You don't look it. I rarely do, he said gently, and she seemed to think about that more than she let on. Her name was Vera Malloy, and she had the kind of past that lived in long shadows and short regrets. She'd managed Lucille, claimed to have taken her in when the girl was green and desperate, which meant she probably owned her soul, or had at least tried. She didn't cry when she spoke about her. She just blinked too much and ordered a whiskey she didn't drink. She had someone, Vera said finally. Some guy, wore nice suits, looked like he read poetry and broke kneecaps. You know the type. Father Brown did. Too many of them ended up with bruised egos and blood on their collars. I told her he was poison, Vera said, but she thought she could change him. Girls always think they're the antidote. They never ask what happens when the venom runs out. Did she ever mention his name? She was careful, called him St. Jude, like he was some kind of lost cause. Father Brown sipped his tea. Fitting. He found St. Jude at the edge of town, in a bar where the lights were low and the men lower. The man was broad-shouldered, snake-eyed, and wore a priest's charm on a chain around his neck like a joke no one dared laugh at. You the collar been sniffing around? Yes, said Father Brown, and you're the kind of man who gets very nervous when a priest walks into a bar, which is curious. St. Jude, whose real name was likely something less poetic, smiled like a blade. Maybe I just don't like being watched. No, said Father Brown, you don't like being known. That landed, not hard, but deep. The thug's eyes flicked sideways to the man at the corner table, to the bartender's hand under the counter. I'm not here for trouble, Father Brown said. I'm here for Lucille. Jude tensed. She's gone. I know. I didn't kill her. Father Brown tilted his head. I didn't say you did. She ran off, Jude said. Too many lies, too many debts. She was into something deeper than I could pull her out of. Or perhaps you pushed, Father Brown murmured. Jude stood. You keep talking like that, Father. You might not walk out. I might not, said Father Brown. But then, sin rarely likes the sound of its own name, does it? That's when the bartender pulled a gun, not for show, for punctuation. But before anything could happen, a voice cut in from the doorway. You shoot him, Vera Malloy said, and I swear to God, I'll burn this place down with your mother still in the back room. She stepped into the light, heels sharp against the tile. In her hand was a white envelope. She handed it to Father Brown. Found it in Lucille's old dressing room, hidden behind the mirror. Figured you'd know what to do with it. Father Brown opened it, with care. Inside were two things, a photograph and a letter. The photo showed Lucille in front of the chapel, smiling, young, holding hands with a child that couldn't be hers. The letter was addressed to the one who finds me but does not search for me. In it, Lucille spoke of debts she didn't owe, men she didn't trust, a child she'd hidden, and the last song she planned to sing before disappearing for good. She didn't name names, but she described voices, gestures, the smell of the cologne Vera wore, and she mentioned the glove. "She left it for me," Father Brown said softly. "A breadcrumb or a benediction." Jude looked furious. Vera looked tired. "I thought she'd double-crossed me," Vera said, almost to herself. "I thought she was setting me up with those cops. I told Kessler she had the book." "Kessler?" Father Brown asked. She nodded. "Detective. Badge, bribes, and brass knuckles. Thought he owned every girl in the city." Father Brown exhaled. "Then Lucille's not dead." "Not if he thought she still had it," Vera said. "She's just lost." He found Kessler that night, parked in a black car, outside St. Dimphna's, the kind of man who smoked without rolling down the window. When Father Brown approached, Kessler didn't bother pretending surprise. "You priests always get in the middle of things." "Only when souls are involved," Father Brown said, "and you've mislaid one." Kessler shrugged. "She ran. She's dead. Same thing." Father Brown leaned in close. "Except you know she's not, and you're holding her somewhere quiet, somewhere she can't talk." Kessler smirked. "You got proof?" "I have faith. That won't hold in court. It holds in hearts, and it breaks men like you." Kessler opened the door. "You gonna preach me into giving her up?" "No," said Father Brown. "I'm going to let your fear do it." "Fear?" Father Brown nodded. "Lucille left names, ledgers, photos. If I vanish, they surface. You can kill her or silence me, but the truth won't stay buried. That's the problem with sin, detective. It always leaves footprints." Kessler's hand twitched on the gear shift. "What do you want?" "To bring her home," said Father Brown, "and to see you kneel." The next morning, Lucille Gray was found in a bus terminal in Trenton. Bruised but alive, she carried no bags, just a child's locket and a letter she never sent. Kessler resigned the same day, citing personal failings. No one wept. At Mass, the next Sunday, Father Brown found the glove again, placed carefully on the steps of the altar, clean this time, with a note inside. "For what you carried and never asked me to explain." He folded it gently and said nothing. The rain started again just after dusk, and the city folded into itself with the sound of wet paper and whispered names. Somewhere, a jazz song played about heartbreak and cigarettes. And somewhere else, a woman who had once run from everything sat quietly in the third pew, no longer hiding. Father Brown lit a candle. He never wore gloves, but he knew how to handle those who did. Chapter 3. The Man Who Lit No Candle. The city breathed like a beast that never slept, low and slow, exhaling soot and neon, and the sound of shoes running somewhere in the dark. On nights like this, when the rain blurred the street lamps into halos and the gutters whispered secrets in oily tongues, most men kept their heads down and their collars up. Father Brown, however, walked calmly through it, small and round and slightly damp, as if the storm didn't dare offend his cassock. His shoes made soft taps along the wet stone as he climbed the steps of St. Jude's Infirmary, a forgotten chapel tucked behind a hospital that remembered fewer names than it buried. The door was ajar, That was the first thing. The second was the silence. Not reverent, suffocating. Inside, the candles were all dark. Not a single flame flickered beneath the saints or in the votive racks. The only light came from the greenish hum of a buzzing exit sign and the moonlight struggling through the stained glass. Father Brown blinked once, twice, and then moved forward. His breath came in small puffs. He hadn't come for prayer tonight, but for penance, not his own. He found the body just past the altar, slumped against the side pew, head tilted like a puppet, with its strings cut. The man's collar was clerical, but the blood on his shirt was not sacramental. His name had been Father Mallory, young, sharp-cheeked, and freshly ordained. The kind of priest the papers liked to write glowing paragraphs about when a bishop needed good press. But tonight, he was just another man who'd learned too late that secrets carry weight. There was no weapon, no footprints in the puddle of blood, just the dead and the dark and a faint scent of cinnamon. Too warm, too out of place, too deliberate. Father Brown stared at the extinguished candle rack. That was what it was then, a message. He stood for a long time, staring at the empty wick where someone had plucked out the light and said nothing. By morning, the press was clawing at the chapel gates like vultures in trench coats, and the diocese had sent a man with a gold crucifix and nervous fingers to keep the priests quiet. But Father Brown was not quiet. He walked down to the corner of 3rd and Marrow, where the hospital night shift ended and the drunks began, and found his answers in a bar with no name and windows painted black. The bartender recognized him too quickly and poured him a glass of water with shaking hands. "Don't want no trouble, Father," he said. "I never bring trouble," Father Brown replied. "I just happen to arrive where it already lives." "Wasn't me," the man said. "Of course not. But you saw who it was." The bartender's jaw worked for a moment, like he was chewing on whether to lie. But lies don't last long under Father Brown's gaze. They tend to fall apart, embarrassed. "She came in around 11, he said finally. "Dark coat, perfume like sugar, and sin. Asked if the chapel was still open. Asked for Mallory." Father Brown nodded. "And did he meet her?" The bartender shook his head. "She left alone. But he followed a minute later. Looked nervous, like a man going to a confession booth he didn't trust." Father Brown smiled sadly. "That's the most dangerous kind. Her name was Claudette Vale, and her address was carved into the social pages like lipstick on a mirror. She was the kind of woman who made men forget their marriages and remember their debts. Rumor said she'd once been married to a banker who vanished without a trace. Another said she sang in Paris cabarets until a fire claimed the stage and all the witnesses. All of them agreed on one thing. Wherever Claudette went, something beautiful died. She was waiting for him in the confessional of a shuttered theater of all places. Dressed in black, veil like smoke, voice like a lullaby meant to put conscience to sleep. "You're not the usual priest," she said. "I'm rarely usual," Father Brown answered. "Still, it's always strange to confess to someone who's never sinned." He chuckled softly. "You'd be surprised." She tilted her head. "You came about Mallory." "I came about the man who didn't light a candle." Her eyes darkened, just a touch. A blink too slow. A breath held too long. "You believe in symbols, Father." "I believe in meaning," he said, "and in how guilty hands leave behind silence. A candle not lit is a louder message than any letter." Claudette smiled. but it never reached her eyes. He begged me for absolution. From what? From loving me. Father Brown's voice was calm. That's not a sin. No, she said, but what he did to keep it hidden was. He waited. She leaned forward. He took money from the hospital, told me he'd put it back, that he just needed a way out of the priesthood without shame, said he was going to run. We were going to disappear. And then he got cold feet, started talking about going to his bishop, about confessing everything, about leaving me behind. You killed him, Father Brown said, not accusing, just naming. No, she said, but I sent someone who could. Father Brown closed his eyes briefly. And the candles? I always light one before I leave, she said. Always. Except that night. That night, I wanted to see what happened in the dark. He stood. You already knew. She said nothing. She didn't cry. Women like her didn't need tears. They let others bleed instead. Father Brown found the man she'd sent in a butcher's shop that doubled as a gambling den. His name was Calder, ex-military, now muscle for hire. He had hands like sledgehammers and a voice like gravel soaked in bourbon. He laughed when Father Brown walked in. A priest, he said. You lost? Looking for something, Father Brown replied. You won't find it here. I usually do. Calder leaned against the meat. Counter, you're braver than you look. No, Father Brown said. Just smaller. People talk around me more freely. Calder's eyes narrowed. You accusing me of something? No, Father Brown said. I'm reminding you of someone, Father Mallory. Do you remember him? Can't say I do. That's strange. You served with him, in France, before the collar. That landed, a flicker, just for a moment, behind the butcher's eyes. Recognition and regret. He was weak, Calder muttered. Always second-guessing, always praying, even when the shells came down. And after, Calder's jaw tightened. He should have never worn the cloth. And you should have never taken it from him, Father Brown said. The silence stretched. I didn't mean to kill him, Calder said. I just meant to scare him, shake him up, tell him Claudette was through with his cowardice. But he didn't fight back, Calder swallowed. He said something, right before, said I didn't have to do this, that I could still be saved. Father Brown's voice was low. And you hated him for that. Calder didn't reply. He just looked down at his hands. You knew the war would end, Father Brown said, but you needed someone to keep fighting. So you fought him. He was going to leave her, Calder said. She told me, said he was going to throw her aside like garbage. She lied, Calder blinked. She lied to you, Father Brown repeated, like she lied to him. And like, she'll lie to the next man who thinks she's a rescue mission. Calder sank onto a stool. She said, he stole money. No, said Father Brown. He sold his mother's land, tried to make a clean break. She said, she always says, that's how she survives, by making men feel like they can't. The butcher's shop was quiet after that. Later, when the papers called it a lover's quarrel gone wrong, and the diocese issued a statement of sorrow, Father Brown stood once more in St. Jude's and lit a candle. Just one. Claudette was never seen again. Some say she went to Argentina. Others swear she died in a hotel fire, just like the first time. Father Brown suspected she simply changed her name and found a new stage to haunt. Calder turned himself in, said the priest's words wouldn't stop echoing, said he wanted silence, real silence, for once in his life. And Mallory? His grave bore no inscription beyond the cross and a line from Psalm 18. He brought me out of deep waters. Father Brown visited often, not to pray, but to think about light and the men who fear it, and about those who never light candles, because they've already set the world on fire. Chapter 4. Ashes in the choir loft. It started with the fire. Small at first, just a cough of smoke rising from the choir loft during matins. The kind of thing that might have gone unnoticed if the old church didn't creak like a guilty conscience. But then came the smell. Burnt varnish, hot ash, something sour that didn't belong in a place of prayer. By the time Father Brown climbed the spiral stair to the loft, the fire was dying, curling into itself like a secret retreating. He put it out with a pail of holy water, not out of ritual, but necessity. What was left was worse than flame. A scorched hymnal, a torn cassock, and a pile of blackened ash in the shape of something once human. They told him afterward there had been no vespers scheduled, that the organist, young Jacob Dawn, hadn't shown up for 3 days, that the girl who cleaned the pews found a smear of blood beneath the communion rail that no one could explain. But it was the ash that stayed with Father Brown. The shape of it, the suggestion of knees, the way the head had bowed in final prayer, or shame. He didn't call the police right away. He never did. Instead, he stood over the ruins with the silence pressing in like fog, and murmured a psalm, not for the dead, but for the living, who had done this. The detective who finally showed up wore suspenders that strained against his gut, and eyes that looked like they'd forgotten how to blink. His name was Buckley. He smelled of stale coffee and bad habits, and he eyed Father Brown like a puzzle with a missing corner. "You the one found it?" Buckley asked, thumbing through a notebook he didn't write in. "I was the one who put out the fire." "You recognize the ash?" "That's a curious question," Father Brown said. "Ash has a way of making everyone look the same." Buckley snorted. "You got a sense of humor, I'll give you that. Some folks say Dawn was into something he shouldn't have been." "Such as?" Buckley grinned like a man who enjoyed his own bad news. "Debt, booze, and a certain lady who spends more time in confession than the altar boys." Father Brown didn't blink. "And her name?" "Carla Voss." He knew the name. Everyone did. She sang at the Blue Seraph with a voice like velvet dipped in poison. Men left tips big enough to cover guilt, and women left when she sang. Carla had a past that smelled like jasmine and gunpowder, and the kind of smile you regret before it's finished forming. She was the type of woman who could make a saint sin, or at least consider it. Father Brown visited her dressing room before the night's second set. The hallway outside was thick with perfume and piano chords. Her door was cracked open. Inside, Carla leaned into a mirror like it owed her something, applying lipstick with the care of a surgeon. "You don't look like a fan," she said, not turning. "I'm not," Father Brown said, "but I believe in redemption." "Then you're wasting your time." She finally turned. Her eyes were glassy, and her smile curled like smoke. "Unless you came to confess something, Father." "Only curiosity," he said. "Tell me about Jacob Dawn." Her expression didn't change, but her hands stilled. "He was a boy, playing dress-up in a man's world. Thought he could fix me. Thought the collar made him untouchable." "Did it?" She laughed, sharp and humorless. "Nothing's untouchable when it bleeds. He loved you. He thought—" "He did," she said. "But love's just faith with lipstick on it, isn't it? He wanted me to be saved, I just wanted him to stop watching me like I was already damned. You told him you'd meet him at the chapel. She froze. Who told you that? No one, said Father Brown. But you're not the type to run, and he wasn't the type to stay away. She said nothing. Did you kill him? Carla picked up her cigarette case. Does it matter? It does to God, Father Brown said quietly. She lit the cigarette with a trembling hand. He said he found something. Said someone at the Seraph was laundering through the choir fund. That's why he was always at the chapel late, digging through ledgers. Father Brown's eyes narrowed. Who? Didn't say, but he got scared. Said he saw someone watching from the loft. He left her dressing room without asking permission, walked back into the rain, and stood for a while on the chapel steps. The choir fund. That was new. Most priests barely knew where the money came from, let alone where it went. But Jacob had been different. Young, naive, brave in the way the desperate sometimes are. Father Brown found the ledger in the locked cabinet behind the pulpit. The entries were clean. Too clean. The numbers didn't lie, but they didn't tell the truth either. He traced the ink with his finger and stopped at one name. Simon Keel. Keel was the choir master, formerly, before he'd retired early after an unfortunate misunderstanding with parish donations. Father Brown hadn't seen him since. He found Keel behind a pawn shop on 9th, tuning a busted organ for a whiskey bar that couldn't afford a band. The man looked thinner, older, and altogether more dangerous. You've aged, Keel said, not looking up. Sin will do that, Father Brown replied. You came about the boy? He was burned alive in a chapel. Yes. Keel didn't flinch. He was sniffing where he shouldn't have. Which led him to you? He thought so. And was he right? Keel finally turned. I was stealing, yes. But it wasn't my fire. I would have let him talk. Let him blab to the bishop and crawl back to the pulpit with bruises on his pride. I didn't need a corpse. That's someone else's style. Who? Father Brown asked. Keel's voice dropped. You ever wonder why the cops never touched me? Why Buckley kept the papers off my name? Because I paid him. Same as I paid him again last week when I heard the kid was digging. Buckley knew. Keel nodded once. I think he warned me too late. Father Brown left in silence. The sky had darkened to bruise purple, and the street lamps hissed like snakes. He found Buckley in his car, parked across from the chapel like a sinner watching a funeral. You lied, Father Brown said, opening the passenger door. Buckley didn't argue. I tried to warn him. You took money to keep quiet. I thought he was just bluffing. I didn't think... He stopped. He was a good kid. Too good. You let him die, Buckley swallowed. What do you want, Father? A confession? No, Father Brown said. I want your badge. Buckley didn't move. If you won't give it to me, Father Brown said, I'll take it to the papers, to the bishop, to every widow who ever lit a candle for a husband you helped bury in silence. Buckley took the badge from his coat, laid it on the dash. Father Brown stood up. Sin isn't always fire and bullets, Lieutenant. Sometimes it's just doing nothing when you could have done something. He walked back into the chapel. It was quiet now. The ash had been cleaned, but the air still remembered. At the next Mass, no choir sang. The pews were fuller than usual. Carla sat in the back, veil drawn, lips tight. Buckley was gone. Keel disappeared 2 nights later, and the pawn shop caught fire under suspicious circumstances. Father Brown lit a single candle and placed it in the choir loft. He didn't pray. Some sins don't need forgiveness. They just need to be seen. Chapter 5. A Knock at Vespers. The knock came just as the bells began their slow descent into Vespers, echoing through the chapel like a confession made too late. Father Brown had been lighting the altar candles himself. Otto the sacristan had taken ill again, or at least claimed to, and the small flame trembled in his fingers as the sound reached him. It wasn't the knock of a penitent, not the hesitant tap of someone weighed down by sin and looking for mercy. It was hard, precise, like someone who didn't believe in forgiveness and wouldn't ask for it even if they did. The front door opened a second later, uninvited, and the woman stepped in, wearing red gloves and a veil like midnight. Father Brown turned slowly, candle still in hand, and gave her the smallest of nods. She didn't speak at first, just looked around the church, like it was unfamiliar terrain. Her heels clicked across the stone, like punctuation on a sentence she hadn't spoken yet. When she reached the front pew, she finally looked at him. Her voice was low and warm and brittle at the edges. "You don't lock your doors." "This place is for the lost," Father Brown replied gently. "Locks are for those who've already given up hope." She smirked, but it didn't touch her eyes. "I suppose that makes me your kind of visitor. I've found that the ones who walk in during storms are usually running from something worse." Outside, the rain slashed the windows in vertical streaks, slicing the world into fragments. The woman sat. Her coat was expensive, but soaked. Her perfume was faint, but precise. Violets, with something metallic beneath it. Her gloves didn't come off. "I need a favor," she said, voice careful. "That's usually how these things begin." "I'm looking for someone," she said. "A man named Felix Marrow. You might have heard the name." Father Brown nodded slowly. "I've heard it whispered in the same breath as blood and bribes." "Then you know why I'm looking for him. You're not the police." "I'm something worse," she said. "I was his wife." That landed, not because it was rare. Men like Marrow often left wreckage in both bank vaults and bedrooms, but because she said it without bitterness. She said it like a diagnosis. "He disappeared 2 days ago," she continued. "Walked into a club on 44th called the Chariot Room and never walked out. You think he's dead?" She looked at him. "No. I think he's hiding, and I think you're the only one he'd trust." Father Brown tilted his head. "Trust is not a word men like Felix use often." "Unless they need to vanish," she said. "Unless they've sinned too loudly." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied her face. Not just the makeup, not just the veil, but the tremor behind the calm. The way her eyes flicked to the altar once, as though something sacred had caught her off guard. She wasn't here to pray, but something inside her had remembered how. "What do you want? From me, Mrs. Marrow? I want you to find him, and I want you to make him face what he's done." Father Brown nodded. "Not revenge, remorse." She looked away. "There's a difference?" "There always is. One consumes, the other redeems." He visited the Chariot Room that evening, when the sky had turned the color of old bruises and the streetlights bled into the puddles. The club had a red awning and a man at the door who looked like he'd broken more bones than promises. Father Brown greeted him like an old friend. "Looking for a man who didn't leave," he said. The doorman squinted. "You're the priest." Usually, he was let in. Inside, the Chariot Room smelled like bourbon and money laundering. The singer was too good for the place, which meant she was stuck. The bartender had tattoos he pretended not to remember getting. And in the far corner, under the pretense of shadow, sat two men who watched everyone without blinking. Father Brown found the manager, behind the curtain, counting chips and sweating in a linen suit. His name was Reggie Poe, and he was the sort of man who thought a smirk could erase a felony. "You don't look like you gamble," Reggie said. "I gamble on people," Father Brown replied. "Poor odds." Sometimes. They danced around it for 10 minutes, names not said, questions not asked, until Father Brown dropped it plainly. "Felix Marrow. Was he here?" Reggie's hand froze halfway to a draw. "What makes you think that?" "His wife." Reggie blinked. "Ex." Father Brown smiled. "You said that too quickly." Reggie sat back. "Look, he came in, played a hand, drank something neat, talked to a man in a grey hat, then he left. No one's seen him since." Reggie's lips thinned. "That's not my problem." "But it is," Father Brown said, voice soft, "because Felix wasn't just hiding from his wife. He was hiding from his partners." Reggie stared. "You think I offed him?" "I think you knew he was." Marked Reggie's fingers, drummed the table. "He got in deep with Calder's people. Borrowed too much, promised too little." Father Brown nodded. "And the man in the grey hat?" Reggie sighed. "Goes by Hart. Quiet type. Doesn't talk unless someone's dying." Father Brown found Hart 2 days later, in the back of a pool hall off East Temple. The man looked like a shadow pretending to be a man. Grey suit, grey eyes, fingers that rolled a cigarette like he was carving a bullet. "You're the priest," Hart said. "Usually." Hart offered him a chair. "You shouldn't be here." "And yet I am." They talked in circles at first, then spirals, then lines that narrowed. "Felix came to me," Hart said finally. "Wanted out. Said he had something big. A file. Names. Accounts. Said it would burn everyone." "And what did you do?" Hart didn't answer. "Did you kill him?" "No," Hart said. "But I told someone who would." "Why?" "Because truth like that is a weapon." And he was pointing it at all the wrong people. Father Brown stood. "You're afraid of what he knew." "No," Hart said. "I'm afraid of what his wife knew." That stopped Father Brown cold. "She set him up," Hart said. "Made sure the meeting happened. Made sure I was there." Father Brown left in silence. Back at the chapel, the door was locked this time. The rain had stopped. The street was clean, like the city had finally finished its weeping. Inside, he found her, Mrs. Marrow, kneeling at the altar, hands clasped like a child caught in the dark. "You lied," Father Brown said. She didn't turn. "I told you he needed to face what he did, but it was you who needed him gone." She looked back. "He ruined lives, mine included." "He ruined himself," Father Brown said, "and you fed him to the wolves to feel holy again." Her eyes glistened. "He killed my sister." Father Brown blinked. "She overdosed after one of his parties," she said. He laughed. "When I cried, said people like her were weak." "I'm sorry," Father Brown said. "I'm not," she replied. "Not anymore. You used me. I had to. You're the only one they talk to." He walked toward her. "And what do you want now?" She stood slowly. "Peace. You won't find it in ashes," he said. "Only truth, and that's never quiet." "I gave them the file," she said. "Every name, every account." He kept it in a hollow missile at home, like a joke. "What will you do now? Disappear? Then you'll never stop running?" She looked at him. "I already have." She left the way she came. silent, unrepentant, alone. Father Brown watched the chapel door close behind her. The candles flickered, then steadied. That night, he said Vespers alone, and for the first time in years, he prayed not for the sinner, but for the silence they leave behind. Chapter 6. The Window That Saw Nothing. It was 11:30 when Father Brown heard the knock. Not the usual kind. This one came soft and anxious, like it was asking permission to exist. The rain had started again, that slow, whispering drizzle that coated the city in a thin film of regret, and the chapel was empty except for the candle he always left burning by the statue of St. Jude. He rose from his desk, joints creaking like old pews, and opened the side door to find a woman standing beneath the arch, hat brim dripping, and eyes flickering in the gaslight like wet glass. She didn't speak at first, just stared at him, arms crossed tightly over her coat like she was holding herself together. Her perfume came in just behind her, a sharp lavender with something darker underneath. She looked like she'd been crying for hours and only stopped because it had started to feel useless. "I was told you don't judge," she said, voice thin. "Only what's in front of me," he replied. "Come in." She hesitated, then stepped inside, careful not to let her heels echo too loudly on the stone. She moved like someone who thought the world might notice her if she wasn't careful. Father Brown watched her carefully. It was always the quiet ones who had something loud to confess. "Do you know a man named Vico Laren?" she asked. He blinked. "A name like that stays with you. Bookkeeper for the Donnelly family. Disappeared 6 days ago." She nodded. "I'm his wife." He let that settle. "I'm sorry. I'm not here for sympathy," she said. "I'm here because I think someone wants me to believe he's dead. And I don't." "Why come to me?" "Because the police say the window saw nothing." He waited. "Our apartment," she said, finally taking off her coat. "The one above the tailor shop on Bleecker. Someone smashed in the back window the night he vanished, but there was no sign of a struggle, no blood, no break-in. They say it looks staged, and now people keep telling me to let it go." "People like?" She swallowed. "The family, his associates, the detectives, everyone." Father Brown gestured toward a chair. She sat like the wood might bite her. "I just want to know if he's alive," she said. "Or if they made him disappear and want me to pretend it's a magic trick." He folded his hands. "And what do you believe?" She looked at him then, eyes hollow and furious. "I believe someone smashed that window from the hall inside. I believe Vico walked away from our life because he found something that made him sick." Father Brown's eyes narrowed. "And what did he find?" She hesitated. "A name, scribbled in a ledger, something that shouldn't have been there. I never saw it, but he told me enough. Said it was a friend, someone close." "Close to him?" She shook her head. "To me." The silence stretched. Rain ticked gently against the chapel's stained glass like fingernails. "I'm not asking you to find a corpse, Father," she said. "I'm asking you to find a coward." He went to Bleecker Street the next morning, just as the tailor was opening up shop. The place looked clean, too clean, the kind of spotless that happens when someone wants to erase something. The back alley reeked of vinegar and spoiled meat, and the shattered glass from the window was still scattered in the gutter, untouched. That told him something. He knocked on the tailor's side door and found a man named Hugo, thin as a stiletto and twice as sharp. Hugo had the eyes of someone who saw more than he admitted, and the mouth of someone who rarely used what he knew. "Window got broken last Tuesday," he said flatly. "I told the cops." "Did you tell them about the man who walked out with a suitcase at 3 in the morning?" Hugo stiffened. "No man came out." "But you heard something." "Didn't say that." "You didn't have to," Father Brown said. The man folded. "He was humming," Hugo said. "That's what I remember. Not a sound a man makes when he's being dragged. He was humming and carrying something heavy. Didn't look back. I stayed quiet. Didn't want trouble." Father Brown nodded. "But he left on his own." "Yeah," Hugo muttered. "Whatever happened after didn't happen here." Father Brown took the streetcar down to the waterfront. Vico had worked numbers for Donnelly's gambling houses, but he'd also been seen delivering donations to charities with no addresses. Money cleaned through churches and orphanages and missions that never served a soul. The key was St. Gabriel's Shelter, a place the city forgot, but the Donnelly boys remembered well. Inside, the air smelled of dust and resignation. A woman named Sister Claire ran the place with hands rough as rope and eyes sharp enough to skin a lie. "Vico," she said, "he stopped coming 2 weeks ago. He find something?" She nodded. "A donation came in, big one. But the books didn't match." He started asking questions. "Did he tell you who made the donation?" Her mouth twitched. "He didn't have to. The check was signed by Mark Sedge." Father Brown exhaled. Sedge wasn't just Donnelly's lawyer, he was his cleaner. The man who polished sins until they shone like civic virtue. If Sedge's name was in the shelter's books, it meant something worse than money had passed through. Father Brown found him in his downtown office, behind glass, thick enough to stop bullets, and smiles, wide enough to hide them. "You priests always poking into things that don't concern you," Sedge said. "I find that all things concern me eventually." Sedge poured himself a drink. "Let me guess. You're looking for Vico?" "Yes. He's gone." "That's not what I asked." Sedge sipped. "You think he's dead?" "I think he left behind a wife who still believes in redemption." Sedge scoffed. "Then she's a fool." "No," Father Brown said, standing. "Just human. But you're a different kind of believer. You think sin is a currency." Sedge shrugged. "It spends well, but it doesn't buy peace." The room chilled. Sedge put down his glass. "You should go, Father." "And you should pray," Father Brown said, walking out. That night, someone broke into the chapel. They didn't steal anything, just left behind a single page, torn from a ledger. On it was a name, Alicia Laron, Vico's wife. The message was clear. Father Brown went to her apartment immediately. Sometimes, that's enough. Chapter 7. The Bell That Rang Too Soon. The bell at St. Dominic's tolled at 6:15 that evening, a low groan across the rain-soaked rooftops long before it was meant to sound. The echo rang out over the fog-draped alleyways like a warning dressed up as a prayer, cutting through the shuffle of soaked shoes and the muttered dealings of men who did their business best in shadows. Father Brown, seated in the sacristy, with a worn Bible in one hand and a lukewarm cup of tea in the other, paused as the sound crawled down the walls like a spider with bad news. The bell never rang at Vespers unless someone pulled the cord manually, and the only one scheduled to do that tonight was a boy too timid to be early and too honest to be careless. By the time Father Brown stepped into the nave, the front doors were already ajar. A chill rode in on the back of the fog. curling between the pews. And at the base of the bell tower, slumped against the stone with one shoe missing and a split lip still weeping blood, was Tommy McRae, the altar boy who didn't lie, didn't steal, and didn't ring the bell unless he was told. He was breathing, barely. Father Brown knelt beside him. "Tommy," he said softly but sharply, as if the boy might vanish if the voice didn't reach deep enough. "Who did this?" Tommy's eyes fluttered. One was already purpled and swelling shut. He lifted a trembling finger and pointed, not out the door, not toward the street, but upward, toward the bell tower. Then he whispered a name Father Brown hadn't heard in 10 years. Marcus Delane. Father Brown stood. Delane had died in 1932 in a car crash off Marlow Bridge. The funeral had been closed casket, the grieving fiancé in black silk and tight tears. He'd been a donor, a drinker, a gambler with charm, slick enough to silence scandal. The parish had quietly buried the sins with the man, and Father Brown, younger then, had stood over the casket with a prayer he didn't quite believe, covered everything inside it. Now his name had been pulled out of the dirt by a boy too broken to be lying. Father Brown sent for a doctor, Dr. Krantz, one of the few men left in the city who still treated the wounded without asking how they got that way, and climbed the narrow stone stairs into the tower. The bell rope swayed slightly, as if someone had only just let go. There was no one up there, just the wide mouth of the bell and the rusted ladder leading to the upper hatch. Beyond that, the open sky bled grey onto the city. But as Father Brown turned to descend, his hand brushed the stone near the pull and found it wet, sticky. Blood, not Tommy's. Back downstairs, the pews were filling with whispers. Word always travelled fast when it came with sirens, and by the time Father Brown stepped out into the street, a tall woman in a velvet coat and cigarette smoke was already waiting beneath the eaves. "Father," she said, drawing out the syllable, like a cat, stretching. "Still chasing ghosts? Some of them don't like staying buried." She offered a smile that hadn't aged a day in 10 years. Her name was Celeste Morano, once Delane's fiancée, now something harder, sharper, lacquered in money and wrapped in gossip. She didn't mourn any more. She wore the memory like perfume, expensive and just a little poisonous. "You heard the name," she said. "That's why I'm here." "I didn't say it. You didn't have to." Father Brown looked at her for a long moment. "He's not back." "No," she said, "but something he left behind is." She pulled a small envelope from her purse. Inside was a faded photograph. 4 men around a poker table, laughing. Delane, unmistakably at the center, a bottle in one hand, his other holding cards that would have won the round. Beside him sat 2 familiar faces, Dominic Bell, now chief of police, and Anton Karloff, local undertaker and quiet power broker. The 4th face had been scratched out with something metallic and deliberate. "He took this the night before the crash," Celeste said. "He told me he was going to clean up, make good. Said he was done playing errand boy for the city's sinners. And he never made it to that bridge on accident." Father Brown folded the photograph. "Why give this to me now?" "Because someone's digging," she said. "And Tommy was just the start." She left without saying goodbye. She never did. Father Brown watched her vanish into the fog, her silhouette melting into the damp. He knew she still believed she'd been in love once, and maybe she had, but it had always been with the idea of a man who'd been too proud to repent and too scared to change. He paid a visit to Anton Karloff next. The undertaker's shop smelled of polish and flowers and something older, deader. Karloff himself wore his suit like a second skin, and his smile like a noose. "I heard about the bell," he said, before Father Brown even asked. "You were with Delane the night he died." "I was with a lot of men who didn't make it past the 30s, Karloff said. "It was a rough time." "Rough enough to kill?" Karloff's smile didn't move. Marcus had a big mouth and no leash. He got what he earned. "But he never made it to confession." "No," said Karloff. "He made it to the river." Father Brown left without answering. Karloff always told the truth when he lied. That night, the chapel's side window was broken. Not the stained glass, the sacristy. A warning, not a robbery. A note pinned to the altar with a knife that hadn't rusted yet. "Stop ringing dead bells." He didn't flinch. He placed the note in his pocket, lit a candle, and waited for whoever came next. It was Dominic Bell, the next morning. Grey at the temples now, suit sharp as the blade he'd once carried in his boot, and eyes that had watched too many trials collapse under technicalities. He didn't sit. "You think there's a conspiracy?" he said. "No," Father Brown replied. "I know there's a sin." Bell crossed his arms. "Delane wasn't innocent. Neither are you." Bell's jaw flexed. "You don't know what he was planning." "I know someone killed a boy to keep it quiet." Bell hesitated. "That wasn't me." "Then help me find who it was." There was a long pause. Bell looked at the candles, then back at the priest. 10 years ago," he said, "Delane got hold of something. Records, a ledger, everything the city's shadows wanted to keep hidden. He told us he was going to go clean." "And you tried to stop him?" "No, Karloff did. He drove him to the bridge. But Delane jumped." "He had a choice," Bell said quietly. "He just didn't think we'd follow." Father Brown's voice was soft. "And the ledger?" Bell looked away. "It was never found." "Until now?" Bell blinked. "It's why Tommy was attacked," Father Brown said. "He found something in the bell tower, something Delane must have hidden there before his final ride." Father Brown waited until Bell left, then climbed the tower once more. This time, he knew what to look for. The third stone down from the east-facing window had a crack in it, thin and deep. Behind it, wrapped in cloth that had once been red, was a small black book. Inside, names, numbers, payoffs, dates. And on the last page, a sentence, written in Delane's own hand. "Let the bell ring when it must. Just not before I've spoken." Father Brown brought it to Alicia Loran, now living quietly under the care of Sister Claire at the shelter. "You'll need to decide what to do with this," he said. She opened the book, read the names, and let out a breath that sounded like a decade escaping her lungs. "They killed him to protect this," she whispered. "No," Father Brown said gently. "They killed him to delay the truth. But it always rings through, eventually." That Sunday, St. Dominic's bell tolled again, on time this time, and loud enough for the whole city to feel it in their bones. In the back pew, Celeste knelt with tears that had waited 10 years to be earned. In the front, Tommy McRae sat with a bruised face and a steady hand. And on the altar, Father Brown placed the ledger, not to be read aloud, but to be known. Chapter 8, The Whisper in the Confessional. It began with the whisper, barely more than a breath, brushing the worn wood of the confessional grill. The kind of sound that could have been wind or sorrow or something darker crawling between worlds. Father Brown sat still, inside the dim, airless box, eyes closed, not in prayer, but in listening. He could always tell the difference between confession and manipulation. The former trembled, the latter planned, but this was different. It was neither the rushed guilt of a shoplifter nor the slow regret of a man who hit his wife once too often. It was cold, careful, a shape clothed in silk and venom. "I have to tell someone," the voice said. Female, precise, older than it sounded. "I've already lied to the police." Father Brown didn't speak. Not yet. "They think it was a robbery," she continued. "It wasn't. He was shot in the head. Close. Someone he trusted. Someone he let in." The silence between them stretched like a noose. "I know who did it," she said, "and I know what they'll do to me if I speak." "Why speak at all, then?" Father Brown asked softly. There was a pause. Then, "Because I loved him." Once the grill trembled. A sigh, maybe, or a sob. "When you decide to stop hiding," Father Brown said, "come see me in daylight. Sin hides at night. Truth walks in the morning." She left without another word. Her perfume lingered longer than her footsteps. By the time he stepped out of the box, the chapel was empty again. But he already knew who she was. Catherine Linley, widow of Mark Linley, once called the cleanest developer in the city, now the quietest corpse in the morgue. Shot in his penthouse 3 nights prior, the papers claimed it was a break-in. The police had named no suspects. Everyone knew he had enemies. Fewer knew he had secrets. Catherine had been married to him for 18 years. A society darling in her 20s, a museum chairwoman in her 30s, and a ghost with rouge by 40. She was beautiful in that way marble statues are, cold, silent, and possibly immortal. She didn't come to church. She didn't ask for prayers. Until now. Father Brown visited the penthouse the next morning, under the pretense of last rites. The doorman didn't question him. Most men didn't. He moved like someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere, a relic no one thought worth stopping. The building smelled of expensive failure. The hallway carpets were thick enough to muffle regret. When he reached the suite, the door opened before he knocked. Catherine stood there, a silk robe around her like armor, cigarette dangling like punctuation. "You move fast," she said. "I walk slowly," he replied, "but I listen carefully." She let him in. The apartment was beautiful and sterile, the kind of space designed by men who feared dust and women who feared memories. A single vase of white orchids sat beneath a wall-sized painting of a seascape too stormy to be comforting. "He died in that chair," she said, pointing to a leather armchair facing the window. "Didn't even spill his drink." "Was he afraid?" "No, just surprised." Father Brown walked the room slowly. He stopped at the wet bar. 2 glasses, one smudged with lipstick, the other clean. "You had a guest after," he said. Her eyes flashed. "I was alone." "No," he said. "You wanted to be—" "That's different." She sat, on the edge of the couch, like someone practicing how to fall. "He told me things," she said finally, "before he died, about people, about what he was planning." "And you?" "I told him I didn't want to know, that I was tired of pretending to be the innocent half of a crime." "And then?" "He kissed my hand," she said, and poured himself a drink. Father Brown looked at the mantel. A single photo sat there, Mark and Catherine, younger, at a gala. Both smiling, both distant. The kind of couple who fooled cameras but never each other. "Do you believe in penance, Father?" she asked. "Yes, even for the unwilling." He turned to her. "Especially for them." She didn't answer, just stubbed out the cigarette and stared out the window. That afternoon, Father Brown walked into Precinct 14 and asked to speak with Detective Mace, the man assigned to Linley's case. Mace was the kind of cop who wore his badge like brass knuckles and his morality like a discount trench coat. "Father," he said, voice dry. "This a confession?" "A correction," Father Brown replied. "You've assumed Linley was killed by an outsider. Break-in, missing watch, scuff marks on the back door." "Too clean," Father Brown said. "Too designed. Thieves don't close liquor cabinets and wipe lipstick from crystal." Mace smirked. "You saying the widow did it?" "No," Father Brown said. "She's already dying, just not fast enough for whoever killed her husband." Mace leaned back. "You got a name?" "I have a shadow." That night, Father Brown returned to the chapel. It had started to rain again, hard enough to hammer the roof like a penitent's knuckles. He lit the candles, said nothing, waited. At 9:42, the side door creaked. A man stepped in, tall, smooth, confident. He smelled like expensive soap and ambition. His face was handsome in the way knives are, refined, sharp, and untrustworthy. "I was told you ask questions," he said. "I prefer answers," Father Brown replied. "They're quieter." The man smiled. "I'm Henry Voss, Catherine's brother." "Half-brother," Father Brown corrected. Voss blinked. "You've been asking around." "I prefer listening." Voss walked slowly up the aisle. He stopped 2 pews from the altar. "She's fragile," he said. "Always has been. Married a man who used her name like a shield." "And you?" "I protected her." "By killing her husband?" Voss chuckled. "I'm not confessing." "No, Father," Brown said. "But your eyes are." Voss stepped forward. "You're not the law." "No," Father Brown said. "The law punishes. I offer forgiveness. I don't want it." "You might," Father Brown said, "before the truth finds you." Voss didn't blink. "Careful, Father. You're wandering into something bigger than sermons." "I know," Father Brown said. "Sin usually is." Voss left without slamming the door. He didn't have to. His silence did the work. Father Brown made one more stop, that night, to St. Jude's Hospice, where a man named Walker Griggs had been recovering from a stroke. Griggs used to be Linley's driver, the kind of man who saw everything from the rear view but never turned his head. He was half paralyzed now, voice gone soft as steam. Father Brown showed him the photo. Linley, Bell, Karloff, the scratched-out face. Griggs nodded, then tapped the left side of the picture. "Henry Voss?" Griggs tapped twice. "Why?" Griggs struggled, pulled out a paper, wrote 2 words. "Land deal." Father Brown exhaled. Voss wanted him gone. Griggs nodded. 1 tap. "And Catherine?" The old man stared at the candle. 2 taps. She knew. By morning, the news broke. Henry Voss had been arrested trying to board a plane to Lisbon. Catherine had confessed. Quietly, publicly, and without a lawyer. Said she'd known. Said she hadn't stopped it. Father Brown found her waiting in the confessional the next night. No veil, no perfume, just her voice. "I thought I could save him," she said. "By looking away." "You can't unsee a soul," Father Brown said. "I wasn't trying to save his soul," she whispered. "I was trying to save mine." "And now?" She wept, quietly, desperately. And for the first time in years, Father Brown simply listened. Because sometimes a whisper in the confessional isn't a trap, it's a beginning. Chapter 9. A Collar in the Gutter. It had rained through the night and into the morning, the kind of slow, sullen downpour that soaked into brick and bone alike. Father Brown stepped out into the alley behind St. Agnes just after dawn, guided not by faith, but by the low, insistent knocking of the church cat against the vestry door. What he found wasn't the animal, but the thing that had drawn it. A small white clerical collar, stained with mud, curled at the edge of a rusted gutter drain, like something discarded in shame. There was blood on it too, just enough to ask a question, not enough to answer it. He picked it up with gloved fingers and looked down the alley, already knowing what he would find. Nothing. The city had a way of swallowing its sinners without chewing. But Father Brown didn't look for bodies. He looked for what was left behind when the body was gone. Regret, fear, sin with a name and a pulse. He wrapped the collar in an old envelope and placed it on the chapel desk without a word. By breakfast, the missing priest's name was on every radio in the city. Father Thomas Darrow. Young, idealistic, soft-spoken, exactly the kind of man people stopped listening to once the donations came in. He'd vanished the night before after a charity dinner at the Belmore Hotel, hosted by the mayor, sponsored by 5 men who never entered churches unless it was for absolution they didn't believe in. Father Brown didn't go to the police. He went to the Belmore. The lobby smelled of cigars and brass polish, its marble floors gleaming like lies underfoot. The desk clerk didn't look up when Father Brown stepped in, but he stiffened slightly, just enough to show recognition. "I'm here for the lost," Father Brown said. "We don't keep a list," the clerk replied. "No," Father Brown said, "you keep it hidden." He made his way to the ballroom, now stripped of its glamour. The tables were still half set with glasses, but the room had the exhausted air of a confession interrupted. A woman stood near the podium, arms folded, lips red and sharp. She wore a green dress, too expensive for grief, and heels that clicked like accusations. "You're him," she said, turning. "The one who keeps poking into the cracks." "I often find things there," Father Brown replied. Her smile curled like smoke. "You'll find nothing about Darrow. He left." "Without his collar?" She blinked. "I don't know what you mean." "Men who vanish usually take their names with them," Father Brown said, "but he left behind the one thing that defined him." Her face changed. Just a little, a tightening around the eyes, the kind of shift that happens when someone realizes they've rehearsed the wrong story. "I'm Regina Vex," she said, "events director. I sat next to him last night. He said he needed air. That was the last I saw." "You didn't follow?" "I'm not in the habit of chasing men." "No," said Father Brown. "You're used to leading them." She turned away, but not fast enough to hide the tremor. Back at St. Agnes, a man was waiting on the steps. Tall, pale, face like a crowbar, something used to pry or break. He wore a city badge pinned crooked to his lapel and had the breath of someone who drank to remember things no one else saw. "Detective John," he said, "we need to talk." Father Brown nodded and led him into the back room. Tea was offered, declined. "You found the collar," John said. "Yes. You should have reported it." "I just did." John smiled, but it didn't last. Father Darrow was into something. Don't know what yet, but he was digging, calling names no one says out loud. Names like Graf, Donahue, a priest from St. Clement who disappeared in 42. Father Brown frowned. The one who investigated the orphanage records? Same one. Never found. But Darrow was asking around. And now he's gone. John leaned in. Don't get involved. Father. Brown stood. I'm already involved. He visited St. Clement that afternoon. The old church was barely standing, its windows cracked, its altar cloth stained with time. A single old nun still lived there, Sister Miara, whose mind wandered, but whose memory held on to things like thorns. Father Darrow came last week, she whispered. Said he was looking for Father Gantz's journals. Did he find them? She nodded slowly. In the wall, behind the vestry cross, Father Brown found them where she said, 3 battered notebooks, pages smudged with ink and something darker, names, ledgers, a pattern of donations flowing to shelters that didn't exist, and one name repeated again and again, Vex. Regina Vex hadn't always been an events director. She'd once managed finances for the Archdiocese's charitable outreach, until she'd quietly disappeared for 2 years and returned with a new title and no questions asked. He brought the journals to Detective John that night. The man read them in silence, then lit a cigarette with fingers that shook. They'll kill him, John said. If he's not dead already, then we find him first. Regina Vex didn't run. She waited. In her office at Belmore, she poured herself scotch and smiled when Father Brown walked in. You found my name, she said. Yes. And? I'm not here to arrest you. She raised an eyebrow. Then what? To ask why. She sat. Because no one cares about the poor. Father, not the city, not the church. They just want the numbers to look good. So you made them worse? I made them real, she said. I took from ghosts to give to the living. Orphans don't need stained glass. They need food. And your salary? She smiled. Justice isn't free. Neither is salvation, Father Brown said quietly. She laughed once. You think Darrow was going to expose me. He came to thank me, to ask me to stop, said it was too dangerous. But he didn't. Leave, Father Brown said, because someone else was watching. She didn't speak. Who took him? She looked down. Donahue. The name tasted like rust. Where? The old canning factory, she said. On Fremont, 3rd floor. Father Brown left without another word. The rain had stopped, but the city still dripped. The factory was empty, except for echoes and rot. On the 3rd floor, bound to a chair, face bruised but breathing, was Father Darrow. And in the shadows, a man stepped forward with a gun. Donahue. Too late, he said. No, Father Brown said. Just early enough. Donahue raised the gun. Think, Thomas, Father Brown said. You want to be the last man who kills for money that isn't even yours. Donahue hesitated. She lied to you, Father Brown said. Vex. She sold you as fast as she sold the others. She said what you needed, Father Brown interrupted, because that's what sin does. It flatters, until it feeds. Donahue's hand shook. I can't go back, he whispered. No, Father Brown said, but you can stop here. The gun dropped. By morning, the headlines were screaming. Missing priest found alive. Charity scandal rocks church. Events director under investigation. No one mentioned Father Brown. He returned to St. Agnes, laid the collar on the altar. It had been cleaned, but the stain remained. Some collars never come white again, only worn with knowledge and grace. Chapter 10. The scent beneath the crucifix. The first thing Father Brown noticed wasn't the blood, though there was enough of it, spattered like unspoken guilt across the steps of the altar. It wasn't the overturned missile stand or the smashed votive glass glinting like broken pennants underfoot. No, what Father Brown noticed first was the scent, a thin trail of perfume, floral but wrong, like lilies steeped in rot. It clung to the base of the crucifix above the altar, faint but undeniable. It had no business in a church. It didn't come from any nun or grieving widow. It was the kind of scent that didn't ask forgiveness. It announced itself, and it lied. He knelt beside the blood and touched the edge of it with a linen cloth. Still warm, not yet dry. Whatever happened had been recent. But the church was empty, just as it had been an hour ago when he last passed through. It wasn't until he noticed the curtain to the confessional swaying ever so slightly that he understood the message. Someone had come to confess and left something behind instead. Father Brown opened the confessional slowly. The seat was empty, but on the floor, tucked beneath the lattice, was a crucifix necklace, silver, with a ruby in the center where Christ's heart should be. He recognized it instantly. It belonged to Sister Eliza, which would have made perfect sense if not for one thing. Sister Eliza had died 6 months ago. By breakfast, the diocese had sent a man in a grey suit to tell him to keep quiet and leave it to the authorities. The police sent no one, which meant someone had already told them not to look. Father Brown wasn't surprised. When sins stacked high enough, they stopped looking like sins and started looking like policy. He visited the last place Sister Eliza had been seen alive, St. Dymphna's Convent, a block from the city morgue and half a breath away from condemnation. The brickwork was crumbling, the sisters thinning. Only a handful remained, and even fewer spoke. But one did. Sister Callista, small, sharp, eyes like needles. She remembered everything, especially things people preferred forgotten. Eliza never belonged here, she said, voice low. She came with her own past and too many questions. What kind of questions? She was looking into something, Callista said. A death, another sister, years back, Sister June. That name never reached my ears, Father Brown said. That's because it wasn't supposed to. Callista led him to the old laundry room. Inside was a record book tucked behind the boiler. June's name was listed. Date of death, 1936. Cause, accidental fall. But the line beneath was scratched out violently. She didn't fall, Callista whispered. She was pushed. Eliza believed it, said she had proof, that someone in the church was using the convent to move things, money, maybe worse. And she told someone? Yes, Callista said. A man came dressed like a priest, but I never saw him pray. She met him in the garden at night. Father Brown nodded. And after that? She stopped asking questions. But she hadn't stopped entirely. Father Brown knew Eliza too well. She'd simply buried the truth deeper, somewhere safe, somewhere sacred, back at St. Agnes. Father Brown entered the chapel alone. He lit a candle, knelt at the altar, and let his eyes drift not to the cross, but beneath it. The base of the crucifix was hollow, almost decorative. When he pressed the carved rosebud near Christ's feet, the panel slid open. Inside was a letter, yellowed and sealed with wax. The wax bore the seal of Bishop Langston, a name that hadn't been spoken aloud since the gambling ring scandal of '39. He died before any charges stuck, conveniently drowned in the East River by what the papers called an unfortunate accident. The letter was addressed to Eliza. It named names. It detailed transfers, orphans relocated without cause, funds misappropriated, deaths listed as disappearances. It mentioned Sister June, and it ended with a name Father Brown hadn't expected, Regina Vex. He wasn't surprised, only weary. That night, he returned to the Belmore Hotel. Again. This time, the lobby clerk tried to stall him. He didn't bother arguing. He simply walked past, silent and steady. Vex was waiting. In her office, in another green dress, with another drink. "You found it," she said, before he spoke. "I found enough." "Then you know I didn't kill her." "Not with your hands," Father Brown said, "but you gave the order." She laughed quietly. "Father, what do you think a woman like me orders? Flowers? Tea service?" "I think you ordered silence," he replied, "and you got blood instead." She sat, crossed her legs slowly. She was going to ruin something that helped people. "You read the file. Do you know how many children we've fed? How many girls we've kept from the streets? At what cost?" She stood. "You think I'm evil. I think I'm practical." "Evil is often very practical," he said gently. She poured a second glass, but didn't offer him one. "You can go to the press," she said, "or the Archbishop. They'll cover it, bury it, like they always do." "I'm not going to the press." She tilted her head. "Then why are you here?" "To forgive you." She froze. "No one ever says that," she whispered. "No, Father," Brown said, "because you don't ask." She looked at him then, eyes wide and tired. "Can I be," she asked, "forgiven?" "Not by me," he said, "but I'll listen while you ask." She wept, just once, then handed him the keys to a storage unit downtown. Inside it the next morning were 23 black ledgers, one red one, and a small gold cross wrapped in Sister June's veil. The diocese took the ledgers. Quietly, the red one vanished somewhere along the way. Regina disappeared with them. But 1 week later, a single donation arrived at St. Agnes. No return address. Inside the envelope was a check, enough to repair the chapel roof, and a note that smelled faintly of lilies. It read, "Thank you." For listening, Father Brown placed the crucifix back on the altar. The scent had faded, but the truth remained. Chapter 11. The Hymn She Never Sang. The storm had come in slow and mean, dragging its heels across the sky like it resented having to arrive at all. By dusk, the gutters were coughing up water like a confession, and the street lamps blinked through the downpour like tired eyes. Father Brown sat alone in the choir loft of St. Brigid's, the only light coming from the flickering votives below. It was nearly Vespers, but there would be no voices tonight, no harmonies climbing the rafters, no children pressing keys in reverence or rebellion, just silence. And the empty space where Naomi Alvarez should have stood. She'd been the choir's best voice, the kind of soprano that made old women weep and tired men remember what youth felt like. She'd sung for the bishop once, been promised a scholarship, a future. But last night, she hadn't shown, and this morning, she hadn't come home. Her mother, Rosa, had come to Father Brown first, not the police. That said something, not because she mistrusted the law, but because she knew what they would say. "She's 18, they'd mutter, probably with a boy." But Rosa had stood there with her hands clenched around a rosary and her eyes already knowing. Naomi hadn't run. She'd been taken, or silenced, or worse. Father Brown started where Naomi had last been seen, outside the Blue Canary, a nightclub that looked like a confession booth if you squinted and smoked enough. She'd been spotted there just after rehearsal, talking to a man in a white suit. Tall, thin, smile like bleach. The bouncer remembered him, so did the bartender, but neither knew his name, just the scent he left behind, something like cloves and rust. The club was empty at this hour, just the hum of fridges and the sour smell of spilled gin. The pianist, a man with fingers too long and a memory too short, said Naomi had sung once, unplanned. One song, a hymn twisted into jazz, the room had gone still. Men had leaned in. Women had looked away. Father Brown sat at the bar and listened. Not to the music, they weren't playing anything, but to the silences, the pauses in the bartender's answers, the way the manager's eyes flicked to the door every time someone passed. They were afraid, not of Naomi, of what followed her out of the club that night. He returned to the chapel, walked through the nave, stood beneath the choir loft, and looked up. Something was out of place. One of the hymnals had been moved, slightly crooked, as if replaced in haste. He climbed the stairs, opened it. Inside, pressed between the pages of Blessed Assurance, was a note. 4 words scrawled in pencil. He made her stop. That was when Father Brown knew she hadn't vanished. She'd been silenced. He took the note to Detective John. The man looked tired, and for once, didn't pretend not to care. "You know what this means?" John asked, cigarette twitching at his lip. "I know someone wanted her voice gone." "She testify against anyone?" "No," Father Brown said, "but she made someone feel seen. That's worse." John sighed. "You got a name?" "I've got a suit," Father Brown said. "White, cheap, dangerous." John swore under his breath and nodded. "There's a man, Vincent Ray. Puts girls on stage, then takes more than applause." "Where?" "South Wharf. Rents a warehouse." Father Brown went that night. The warehouse sat like a coffin on stilts. Ray's men, 2 thick necks in raincoats, tried to stop him at the door. He walked past them like fog. They laughed, then they stopped laughing when he didn't. Inside, the room was half dark, cluttered with stage props and mirrors. Ray stood by a broken piano, smoking a thin cigarette and watching his reflection. "You the priest?" he asked. "I'm whoever you don't want to see right now." Ray smiled. "You here to save someone?" "Yes," Father Brown said. "Her name is Naomi. Never heard of her?" "You heard her sing." Ray's eyes narrowed. "Lots of girls sing." "Not like her." Ray dropped the cigarette. "You should go, Father." "No," Father Brown said. "You should listen. Because I know what you did. I know she said no. And I know you didn't like that." "She's gone," Ray snapped. "She left." "No," Father Brown said. "You made her leave. You told her the hymn was too much, too clean for your place." Ray's jaw tightened. "You couldn't own her voice," Father Brown continued. "So you tried to kill it." "She's alive," Ray growled. "You don't scare me." Father Brown stepped forward. "I don't have to." Behind him, John entered, gun holstered, hands open. 2 uniforms followed. Ray looked around, but the walls didn't answer. They found Naomi 2 hours later, locked in a dressing room. Drugged, but alive. She cried when she saw Father Brown. "I didn't finish the song," she whispered. "You don't have to," he said. "You already lived it." Back at the chapel, the choir sang again. Naomi, not yet ready, sat in the front pew, and Father Brown lit a candle for the hymn she never sang, and the truth it had already spoken. Chapter 12. The Smile That Knew Everything. The man who smiled before dying didn't cry out. He didn't beg. He didn't pray. He just looked up at the man holding the gun with a grin that shouldn't have been there, not at the end of things. The kind of smile that crawled under your skin and sat in your bones for years afterward. The kind that said, "I know something you don't." The bullet hit him center mass, the thud muffled by the warehouse walls and the rain beating the roof in time. With a hymn no choir ever dared sing, he slumped forward, hands still curled around a crucifix, lips parted just slightly as if he'd meant to say something else, something final, but had decided instead to die with that smirk. A week later, nobody remembered his name, except Father Brown. It wasn't the man himself that bothered Father Brown. He'd seen plenty like him, small-time fixers trying to climb their way into big-time sins, only to be crushed by the weight of what they didn't understand. But the smile, that smile kept Father Brown up at night, because it didn't speak of fear or failure. It spoke of knowledge, as if he'd known what would happen, known who would pull the trigger, and had made peace with it long before the gun was raised. That wasn't resignation. That was revelation. They found the body dumped in the alley behind St. Michael's, slumped beside a crate of spoiled oranges and 2 broken hymnals. Whoever killed him didn't just want him dead, they wanted him silenced. But that never worked. Not in this city, not in Father Brown's city, because sins may bury the body, but they always leave the soul bleeding behind. Detective John showed up with his usual flask and half a notebook, muttering about gang hits and nothing worth chasing. But even he knew better. The man's name was Martin Dace, bookkeeper for the Valenti Syndicate. Clean face, clever hands, and a habit of recording more than numbers. That's what had gotten him killed. And that smile, John had seen it too. He knew, John said, voice quiet over the body. Knew who was coming for him, and he didn't care. No, said Father Brown. He did care, but not about dying. Then what? About being understood. John looked at him sideways. What does that mean? Father Brown didn't answer. He never did until the answer mattered. He started at the confessional. Not the churches, but the kind the city builds in neon. And liquor, smoke-choked bars where men tell the truth because lies cost extra. The Black Door, down on Hanover Street, had seen Dace more than once. The bartender, a woman with fingers like cigarettes and eyes like dirty snow, remembered him. He used to come in Tuesdays, she said. Sat alone, never drank. Did he talk? Only once. Said something strange and said, God already forgave me. I'm just waiting on the devil. Father Brown nodded. That sounded like Dace. He checked the rooming house next. Tiny box of a place on Maple, run by a man who never left the front office. Dace had rented a room on the 2nd floor. Inside, the bed was made, the drawer locked. Father Brown picked it with a hairpin and a prayer. Inside was a single envelope. On it, to the man who listens. He opened it. Inside, a ledger. Not numbers, names. Priests, judges, city inspectors, people who'd paid to keep certain sins quiet. A second sheet listed drop-offs, coded in hymn, titles, and at the bottom, one sentence in Dace's careful hand. If they find this, it's because I let them. Father Brown brought it straight to Jorn, who read it twice and didn't blink once. This is it, Jorn said. Everything. No, Father Brown replied. It's what comes before everything. The men listed were known, protected, dangerous, including a certain Monsignor Fallon, who had a reputation for miracles and a habit of collecting envelopes. Father Brown paid him a visit. The rectory smelled like old wine and new lies. Fallon opened the door with a smile that belonged in a parlor game. "Ah, Father Brown, to what do I owe the—" "Truth," said Father Brown, stepping inside. Fallon's smile didn't fade. "You've heard nonsense, rumors." "I've heard enough to bury you in silence," Father Brown said, "but I prefer light." Fallon poured a drink he didn't offer. "Dace came to me," he said finally. "Wanted absolution." "For what?" "For surviving. He knew too much, saw too much. Thought if he confessed it to me, it would be safe. And you gave him to them." Fallon didn't answer. Father Brown leaned forward. "The problem with sin is it always believes it can negotiate." Fallon sat. "He said he wouldn't run." "He didn't," Father Brown said. "He walked toward the bullet. But he made sure I'd hear him after." That night, Father Brown received a visitor. Not a penitent, a woman. Thin, cold, dressed in red, she sat without asking, and lit a cigarette with a flick of her nails. "You're going to blow it all up," she said. "That depends on whether they listen," Father Brown said. She exhaled smoke. "You think you're different, that they won't touch you." "They won't," he said softly. "Not because I'm untouchable, because I'm already where they fear going." "And where is that?" "Inside their conscience." She left the ledger on the table. Another one, different names, deeper cuts. She didn't say her name, but he already knew it. By morning, Fallon had vanished. John turned in his badge. The papers ran one story before the editor went quiet, but the names were out there now, and the city began to shift. Slowly, like ice cracking. At Dace's funeral, no one spoke. But Father Brown did. Just one sentence. He smiled, because he'd already said everything. And that was the thing about smiles like his. They don't hide the truth. They dare you to find it.